DLC.
Yes, so I am 7 hours into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is per Anthony Taormina's playthrough of it last week when he gave us his review, a tenth of the game. And I think I came to Remake very late. I didn't play Remake until it was out on PlayStation Plus, one of the tiers, whatever that is. And I really liked it. My history with Final Fantasy VII itself as a game is also very odd, where I was the kid who got up before school to play Metal Gear. You know, we had a PlayStation in the house, but not every game pulled me in. And Final Fantasy VII, of course, was this thing that you couldn't escape. It was the supernova. It was the black hole. It was Tom Brady and Steph Curry on one team together playing golf, by the way.
They're both excellent golfers.
Excellent golfers.
So that actually made sense.
That's right. I finally put them together on a team that worked. But I played some of it, but I also watched my brothers play a lot of it. And it wasn't quite past the controller, but it was like, oh, I'm invested in this story, but I don't need to be the one to play it. And then I go out with my friends for a few hours and I come back and I'm like, you played 8 hours without me? And they're like, yeah, of course we did, because we love this game and you left for 8 hours. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. So that's like my OG Final Fantasy relationship. Final Fantasy VII, I think, or Rebirth, is phenomenal. For my 7 hours, I think it is a truly incredible game that is deep in ways that the original game didn't necessarily explore. Mechanically, it's deep. The original game, I think, was also mechanically deep for that turn-based style of combat. And playing through Rebirth now and seeing what is essentially a continuation of what Remake's combat felt like, but with some subtle tweaks here and there. But also, I think a large tweak is putting it into the open world. Remake is a very straightforward experience, and so those encounters were more often or not, telegraphed isn't necessarily the right word, but a similar path, a similar play experience for I think most folks who experienced it. And Rebirth so far allows for me to have these very different experiences, or when I encounter something, for me, could be very different than when Tom does or when you do, Jeff. And I think that's really cool to play with some of the leveling up mechanics and exploring this real-time, quote unquote, combat that Remake introduced and now Rebirth is continuing into this franchise. And so I'm really enjoying my time with it. I do have a couple of, I don't know if they're nits, but I think right now would be my critiques of the game. I'm not sure yet how well it's paced. Like I said, I'm 7 hours in, and maybe I'm getting a little distracted by all of the cool things it's introducing. But I don't know if I've done much of what I'm supposed to do. Like, it really kind of lets you into this world, and you can get lost very easily, which is a good thing right now because I'm enjoying everything I'm doing, but I don't know if I'll think it's a good thing 30 hours in and I feel like I've lost the thread and, I kind of throw my hands up and I'm like, I'm never going to beat it. It's 120 hours. I don't have time for this. So like, how much is my curiosity going to punish me later? I do not think it is a good looking game.
Certainly not as a PS5 exclusive, right?
I do not. I think the cutscenes are incredible, like the character close-ups, not even necessarily cutscenes, but when it kind of transitions to people are just talking, and I guess, it takes the control out of your hands. Some of those character details, glasses that have fog on them in a humid environment, or like dust kicked up on them, and like the elasticity of skin as people emote, just absolutely beautiful. But when you're out in that open world, I'm playing in the graphics mode. I typically now tend to play in the performance mode to get those 60 frames per second. But I just found it to be very muddied and like Vaseline-y in that performance mode that I made this switch to the 30 frames per second mode. And I know you can't necessarily compare two games from different studios, that they should be the same, but comparing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's open world with Horizon, and I mean, they're not in the same league in terms of graphical fidelity. Horizon is just stunning and jaw-dropping, and it is this big open world as well, and I do not think Rebirth looks particularly great in most of the time when you're playing. Low res, assets that are, front and center, like the thing you're climbing on. Sometimes it looks like an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon, or, it's like, that's the thing you pull. That's the book that's going to move. So I think that's kind of a bummer. And then the camera, I don't love the camera. And I don't know if it's the same camera as in Remake, but maybe it's struggling, or I'm struggling more with it in these open world environments. I've moved it back. It gives you 3 options for when you're out of combat. Closer, and then a little further, and then slightly further back. And I've moved it all the way back because when I was closer, I felt like it was getting caught on things. The way you kind of hop and move through the world is still very much the way you hopped and moved through the world in Remake. So it's not as if in the open world, all of a sudden now you're leaping and dive rolling and like moving fluidly the way Aloy does in Horizon. It still is that kind of stilted jump, or you land on an interact square that initiates a climb. And
which drives me bonkers. I hate those interact squares.
It's
I don't know. It's such a pet peeve of mine.
It feels like a relic of Remake to me, where I think it worked a little better in Remake, again, because for most of that game, it was, you were in a city, like tight corridors of an urban environment. And I love riding on my Chocobo, thank you, riding around town. But that camera is, I think, somehow worse. So I really struggle with some of the technical stuff of the game, but I'm loving this game. Like, again, I'm finding myself getting distracted by side quests, wanting to spend time with these characters. My main combat party right now is Aerith and Tifa because I want that love triangle to have spent as much time together as possible. Like, you will fight every fight because this is so awkward. Like, be together always. And so the characters are fun and they're endearing, and the way they interact is really great. I'm not sure if all of the sense of humor is my sense of humor, but it's weird to like hear it versus read it. Like there are moments in the games that I've read a million times and now I hear someone act it and I'm like, oh, that's weird. To hear someone say that with a straight face. But it feels like an accomplishment to make a game that is the middle levels of another game feel so rewarding on its own.
I was actually thinking about that. Is there even another example of a sequel that is the same story in video games? Because we've seen it a bunch of times in movies, right? The Empire Strikes Back, or there's millions of Dune Part 2 is in theaters right now. It's literally the next step of the same story. I don't know another video game sequel that is just the previous game didn't finish a story and we're telling you the next chapter of it. I mean, other than like series. What were they called?
Yeah, like
what was it called?
Yeah, the episodic games.
Episodic games. Yeah,
and like in hindsight,
Half-Life Episode 2 or whatever.
I think in hindsight now you could argue like The Last of Us wasn't complete without The Last of Us 2, except it was, or like God of War wasn't complete without Ragnarok. It was like we had an ending. In Remake, never from the beginning did Remake end. Like that was never the point of Remake to have a satisfying
technically
ending.
Sort of the Horizon series. Horizon had like basically an end, but the end was like a little, not to fully spoil it, but it was like a little bit like, well, we got to find out what happens, and now they're making it's like a trilogy now. So there's like kind of, but you're right that this is abrupt, right? This is like a significant sort of step from one step to the next.
And telegraphed from the beginning to be that, but also not be episodic, what we were taught episodic games would be. It's like, no, these all connect. I think you could jump in with Rebirth and it can kind of catch you up.
You absolutely can. And there's a cool like story up till now thing that they put on the, in the main menu that does a pretty good job, I think, of telling you the story.
And then my last point is that I stand by the demo not being great. That demo is that kind of first flashbacky, the first demo they released. I don't think that shows the game's strengths, at least from what I've played so far. So much of the strengths, I think, are being able to play in this open world in a real lived-in way, and hearing the characters talk and getting to know them. Like, this crew is iconic, like truly iconic. And to be able to spend time with them this way feels really satisfying.
I would go further, not just the demo. I think it's a bummer that the game starts with the flashback. The game is like, okay, you bought this new game, but let's recall back to this time. It's like, well, no. I want to do the next part. Yeah, I have
I
barely
was
scratched.
always really surprised that flashback was not in remake, because I reviewed
Yeah.
remake when it first came out, and I was just sort of waiting for that flashback, and then it never happened, and the game ended, and I was like, oh, I guess they're saving that, and then it was
Yeah.
the first thing.
The beginning of this game, it's a little odd choice. It's minor, but it's an odd choice, I think. And I have barely scratched the surface of Rebirth, but it's interesting to me how similar my take is to yours, Christian, based on the superficial stuff. The visuals I'm legitimately disappointed by, and the camera stuff, I totally hear what you're saying, and I even with my limited amount of time on the game so far, it's already been a little bit annoying. But I mean, the game is awesome, and the storytelling is awesome, and it's a fun world to be in, and they do such a good job of building out that world and making you feel like it is this, it extends beyond the borders of any given scene. So I don't know. I'll play lots more of it, but I just find myself, and maybe this will change as I put more time into it. I find myself, like I was with Remake, just not in love with the combat. It's fine. I think it's fine, but I don't love it. I don't relish it. I feel like many of the fights, and I've actually felt like this with 16 as well, Final Fantasy 16, is I just sort of get through the fight in a very bland way. I'm not incentivized to get creative except on certain fights. And most of the fodder fights aren't fun. And I don't think that's true of your example, Horizon. Like the Horizon series, every single fight to me is fun. Every fight, every time I'm in combat in Horizon is fun to me because I have so many cool options and I'm constantly kind of improvising my way through it and creating all these cool scenarios. And I just don't think what they've done with the combat in this game scratches that for me. I know other people really do love it, but I don't.
I mean, it is superficial only on the surface, which I know is a redundant thing to say, but the combat is super deep. It just doesn't give you tons of moments necessarily up front to scratch.
Yeah, you
enough.
don't need to do
it. But it gives you all the tutorials for it that I found that when I start to need it, I'm like, what's a summon? How do I? Oh, that's right. I do the summon. How do I do the synergy? Well, that bar's not lined up. That bar is lit up. Okay. And like, right. I'm not sure if there will be later tutorials as I get, hey, you played for 60 hours, but you've yet to do the first story mission. Here's a reminder on how to do stuff or not. But what I've been treating the fodder fights as is changing who my main is in combat to get a feel for, I'm going to Tifa main. And so I want to see what that is like, or I'm going to play with this ability from Cloud because Cloud,
But that, I mean, I don't.
I was going to do a minor spoiler, but I'm not even going to say it. So, like, that is, I think that open world enemy in a large RPG has never been where the combat shines, even with a turn-based game. I don't think you're like walking the overmap and like, yay, random encounter. This is going to be a hoot. It's the bigger meteor battles, and I think that holds true in Rebirth as well. So I'm trying to make my own fun in the overworld, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I will. I mean, we don't need to go down a super rabbit hole here, but I do think maybe it's more a feature of my personality than the game. It's a me problem, not a them problem. But that whole like, I'll see if I want to be a Tifa main. I will see if is. I'm always sort of halfway wondering if I would have more fun if I was playing a different character right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
There's always a part of me that's like, that was cool what I did, but what if I was not Cloud right now? You know what I mean? Like, I guess it's my own weird quirk of FOMO that is always ever present in the back of my subconscious or conscious. But I don't know. It is. There's always a kind of a underlying thread of dissatisfaction for me because it's like the computer is the computer doing the fun part right now? Am I missing out on the fun part if I was that guy?
Well, the good news is it's all done the same. And I also think that a little bit the idea of it being real-time combat is not necessarily a disservice, and I know you can tweak it, but like that those real-time moments, at least for me, and this is kind of the groove I found in Remake as well, and I think Anthony Taormina hit on this well also when he was talking about it, is you're just building to do the thing that is kind of turn-based, you know, like you're just building up your command to do it, and I'm happen to be hitting a button that is making me wave my sword around on screen while I do that. And then what I'm really doing is looking for a time dodge or getting that parry window right to get a good stun, and so I can then have the command ready to do, and I've assessed what this enemy needs to do. And so I'm still doing a lot of that stuff. I'm just running around in circles in real time while I wait for that other stuff to happen. But it looks, that stuff looks good. Like the combat is flashy. It is flashy.
It is flashy. Yeah. All right. Anyway, that's Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
We will never talk about it again.
Oh, go ahead.
Before we talk about it, wait, let me talk about it again really quick. No, this is a slight tangent. I did remember one game I want to shout out that does do the sequel thing, which is the Banner Saga. The Banner Saga 1, 2, and 3 does very much tell a single story that kind of continues from game to game to game. So there's probably some more hidden out there, but shout out to the Banner Saga if you've never played that.
Awesome. And please email us or post it in the Discord if there's other that I cannot think of.
Oh, yeah.
And along those lines, I'd love to know what folks think games could benefit from this treatment. Like in 10 years, can we get an Uncharted 1 that is now 3 games? You know, like what other games? Yeah. It is astonishing to me that they were able to pull off what they've pulled off, at least with these. I mean, they could drop the ball with part 3 entirely, and I still think this would be one of the most massively successful remakes or reimaginings of a beloved game. It's not as if they took a stinker and they were like, we can make this good. They took arguably one of the best, most beloved JRPGs of all time and have now turned that one into the 3 best. Like, you know, like
it's pretty wild.
It's astonishing.
To go, here's a 100-hour game. We're going to turn it into 3 80-hour games.
And they'll all be great. Like they're going to be incredible. It's wild.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
You can get the full audio version of this show by subscribing to the RSS feed, which you can find at dlcpod.com. And you can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/dlcpod, where you will get ad-free versions of the show, video versions of the show on demand, and a whole bunch of extra content, like Wednesday's show, paid DLC, including spoiler chats, so much more. That's patreon.com/dlcpod.